Chris Yannick, CYInterview covering Las Vegas and the world. We continue our road to WrestleMania here in Las Vegas. We're 5 days away from night one of WrestleMania that'll take place at Allegiant Stadium, home of the Las Vegas Raiders. Today we continue to revisit some of our best pro wrestling CYInterview segments. Today we bring you our conversation with pro wrestling legend Penny Banner. She is the first AWA Women's World Champion.
Hi, Penny. Good evening. How are you doing, my friend?
How are you, Chris? It's a long time since we've spoken.
It's been about 3 years, I think. That I was a sophomore in high school, I think. Maybe even was my late freshman year in high school.
Oh, my goodness.
So now
you've been chasing me around now for 3 years.
Yeah, basically, for sure. And you were in the book in between. It's called Banner Days, and it probably is the best encyclopedia as far as the history of women's wrestling as you reflect back on the times before your times in the world of professional wrestling through the 50s and the 60s and the 40s and the 70s, everything that you can think of. Just go ahead and give us a brief overview.
Well, first of all, that's really why I wanted to write the book. After I decided that I would do it, and I did have the time to do it, was to show and let it be known the history as I know it. And, of course, you know, I didn't start in the 40s, but I was in 1954, and there were still a lot of girls wrestling then that started in the 40s. So I have the history of what supposedly happened and how it all began. And I mean, even though I didn't wrestle in the 40s, I also did wrestle in carnivals, but I didn't wrestle any men in carnivals. But I did wrestle carnivals and fairs. They're big things in the summertime.
Yeah.
And they still are, I guess, if wrestling was like it used to be, but it's no longer that way.
Ric Flair's mother, if all surprises, was the one who wanted you to write the book in the first place, which is something I kind of find amazing, as I really don't know your relationship with the Flair family and all, but she's long gone. But she said she wanted you to write the book in the first place, but you said I didn't have the time at the time, and now you did, so.
That's right. I am a real estate agent, and I was taking her and Dick, her husband, up to Lake Norman. They were going to buy a home up there, and we just were talking about, you know, she's from Minneapolis and Dick's from Minneapolis. He was a gynecologist, and she told me that she was writing books, and I said, really? I said, you know, everybody said that, you know, my story is really something, and it should be in a book. I said, but I don't have time, and she says, well, tell me. So I just started talking to her, and she says, oh, Penny, she says, I have to write your book. I just have to write your book. And I said, oh, well, okay, we'll talk about that later. And I showed him the house, and then we talked, and then I found out that I had to get everything together, get all the dates together, get all the names together, get all the stories together, write everything up, and then give it to her. And then she was going to write it, and I said, oh, okay, I don't have time for that. And so that was the end of that. And she told me, dear, she said, when you do find the time, you let me know. But then, of course, she got very bad sick, and she couldn't do it. And I just really forgot about it until I met my friend Jerry that I met 40 years ago when I first came here to Charlotte, North Carolina. And she writes for the newspaper, and we had lunch, and she says, Penny, she says, why don't you let me write your book? She says, I know it's got to be an interesting story, and I'm about ready to get out of the real estate. 26 years in this is just about taking its toll on me. And anyway, I said, okay. I had the time, and oh my gosh, my house for 3 years looked like collage. I had papers here and books here and notes here and notes there, and it took close to 3 years for this thing to happen, and it finally did, and everybody seems to love it, and it really makes me feel good.
I basically thought by reading your book about, like, the dates that you remembered and the towns you traveled each time through the 50s and the 60s, I thought she must have had some kind of journals, or she must have had something, because how could she remember all this stuff?
Well, I'm a picture taker, for one thing, and I always had a camera, and places that we went to, you know, I took pictures. And I would always write on the back of it what year it was and who I was with. So that helped. And then along with all the magazines, and I've been collecting the magazine. Well, my mother has actually been collecting the magazines that I've been in. And then, of course, when I was married, magazines were collected from when my ex was in. And I have all of them. And that's what I'm saying. My house looked like a collage. everything everywhere, and I had to go through all of them just looking for any little dates and things, you know. And of course, I remembered a lot of the stories on the road. The road was really something, and I was so glad to get off of it after 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not so much my memory. What it is it's the magazines that pulled me through and my photos that I'd taken.
Mm-hmm.
And then movies, you know, I had movie cameras and did that, and that helped too, so.
Absolutely, for sure. We're speaking to Penny Banner, the first AWA Women's World Champion, here tonight on New Era of Wrestling Radio. She has a book out. It's entitled Banner Days, which is the best look at the history of women's wrestling. If you look at Lou Thesz's book, it's probably the best historic thing of men's wrestling. Well, she wrote the women's wrestling version in her own book. Reflecting back, I think some of the most interesting things were just the fact that you had a very long feud with one of the most colorful and most well-known historians of women's wrestling, which is June Byers, of course, who was the NWA Women's World Champion for many years, and you must have wrestled her about hundreds, thousands of times. What do you remember most about June Byers, who was maybe, I guess you could say, one of the founders of really tough women's wrestling, and there for the beginning, I guess, almost?
Well, really, I have never seen Cora Livingston, who was the first champion, and I had never seen Mildred Burke wrestle either. She left Billy Wolf's Columbus, Ohio booking office in 1953 when she and Billy Wolf, who was the czar of lady wrestling and had the only wrestling school legalized by the NWA, you know, the commission. And anyway, I never saw either one of them wrestle. In 1 month after I began, June Byers beat Mildred Burke for her title by way of Mildred Burke not returning for the second fall, because June did take the first and only fall on her of the 2 out of 3 fall match. But June, she had been training, you know, before I even ever knew I wanted to be I was going to be a lady wrestler. And she just was in such extensive training, and all I can do is say, I mean, I was powerful as a girl. I was only 19, and prior to that I had taken judo, and I had been working out for years, and I just was very, very strong. I just felt so powerful that I felt like a truck could hit me, you know, and it wouldn't. I would stop the truck.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I felt. I felt that strong. But when I met June Byers, I mean, first of all, I had to wrestle. Now, mind you, I had never seen girls wrestle. I'd never heard of girl wrestling. And here they put me in a match against June Byers. And she was up for the championship with Mildred Burke. And I didn't know how to wrestle, but I held my own, and she didn't defeat me. What she was doing was taking on all comers at all the Al Halfacre. She would take them on once a week. And Billy Wolf told me after I began, because there was 2 weeks there before she had to wrestle Burke. And he said, you go up there and I want you to challenge her. And I said, well, okay, I will. Now, what do I do? And he said, just go in there and do what you did when I told you to go against the girls when you first came to Columbus. And I said, okay. And June did not beat me, but, oh, did she blow me up. Just blew me up. But I would describe her as 5'6". She must have weighed 163, 64 pounds. Not an ounce of fat on her. Her chest was thick. A very thick chest, and just powerful arms and powerful back, and her thighs. I know she couldn't see her toes. If she stood up straight and looked down, she couldn't see her toes, so her thighs were so pumped. She absolutely was a powerhouse. And she, yeah, I mean, I just couldn't beat her. I tried for 3 years. In 3 years, she just beat me up, except 1959, I went a draw with her. And she never wrestled me again.
Absolutely, for sure.
And then later on, I didn't know this until I started getting into the history of the books that I was looking at to write my story. I didn't know she was 10 years older than me. And so if I started at 19, she started at 17, and she was then 29. So look at the years' experience she had over me. She was awesome, absolutely awesome. And I was getting to a point there, and I forgot what it was.
Wow, she was.
But anyway, she didn't show up. They had a championship match booked for us again in Angola, Indiana, and she never showed up. And when she didn't show up, Balk Estes, who was the booker in Indianapolis, and James Barnett, he was the owner of the Indianapolis territory at that time, they made calls to each other, and they decided they would change this. It was supposed to be a 4-girl battle royal,
but it turned into a
tag team match.
But it turned into a 9-girl battle royal, correct?
Well, they changed it to that, right, because fighters didn't show up.
Uh-huh.
And that's how I won my... And it was 1 year prior that AWA was formed, period. Mm-hmm. It was always only NWA. And then the Minneapolis and Indianapolis territory, the northeastern section there, decided they were going to make another organization. And they formed the AWA, and it was Nick Bockwinkel, who held the men's title. And they didn't even... I guess they never even thought about having a woman's title. Most women weren't thought about, but when that happened, they made a phone call and they said, let's do it. And they did it, and I won it, and that's how that happened.
The whole story, absolutely, for sure. Okay. In between questions here, one of your great friends from the Cauliflower Alley Club, who is a weekly listener here on New York Wrestling Radio, Percival A. Friend says, tell Penny hi for me and tell her that she is still the only diamond in a field of rocks.
Who said that?
Percival A. Friend.
Oh, Percy Pringle. Are we talking about Al Friend?
Al Friend.
Al Friend. Oh, he is. He is a jewel. I love him. He's so good. Did he tell you he cracked my ribs?
Never.
Yes, he gave me a big hug at the Cauliflower Alley banquet when we rode there 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And my ribs went just like that. They did. He cracked my ribs. They were underneath of my chest. They must have been the underneath ribs or short ribs or something. I'm telling you, he did. He heard him, and he turned white. Of course, I was still leaning over, and I said, well, just wait 1 minute now. Wait, just 1 minute now. And I was trying to catch my breath, and he didn't do it on purpose, I know. He did. He broke my ribs. I'm so tender and fragile. He was a wonderful friend.
Okay, getting into... more stories from the book. You talked about paydays, and I'm going to talk about some other things after that, about Nicholas's Tennessee territory. There not being enough money as far as paydays for women, and then you said Stu Hart from Canada was the best payday ever and paid the women what they deserve. Tell me about the paydays back then for women overall.
Oh, well, there's just no comparison. It was about $60,000 to $100,000 difference in biggest difference between men wrestling and women wrestling is $60,000 to $100,000. I'll put it that way. Mm-hmm. The promoters just didn't pay us girls the same as they paid the men, and they're still doing the same thing in the workforce today. Mm-hmm. Women's Live has come out since then, and they've gotten a little better, but the promoters just didn't pay us what they paid the men for doing the same first fall or the semifinal or the second match or the third match or however many there would be. And Nick Goulas just was not a good payoff man in my books. I couldn't even save $5 a week from the traveling that I was doing. Mm-hmm. And as far as good payoffs, they came from Minneapolis, they came from Texas, both Dallas, Texas, and also Houston, Texas.
Canada.
Great payoff territories. And Stu Hart, what was so good when we went up to Calgary is the fact that our money was worth more than his. Mm-hmm. And then what we got from him, we always ended up getting more because it was worth more in the United States. Mm-hmm. And anyway, that Stu Hart was a wonderful payoff man. Let's see, Minneapolis, Texas. Those are the ones that really stand out in my... Oh, and Jim Crockett's territory.
Yeah.
Right here in Charlotte.
And then after, moving on before I get back to Jim Crockett and the NWA, the big thing about it was, and you mentioned your book through chapters as you're going on, you're going into new wrestling territories, and because women's wrestling was not allowed in every wrestling territory back then, but then you go into new territories, and one of the promoters asked, are you okay with wrestling a black girl? Which I thought was very offensive to that point. And you're like, I don't care what color the girl is, but back then, black wrestlers it was very hard for many wrestlers. I remember Jim Harris, a.k.a. Kamala, saying that he would try to go into a territory, and the promoter would say to him, when the black guy leaves, you can come in because we only want one black guy in our territory.
Well, see, they didn't even call them black girls. I might have had that in my book just because that's what I call them. Today, they're called black, or African American, but back in the day that I was on the road, they were still called colored. I would drive through different cities and go to the gas stations, they were called filling stations, to get gas, and it says whites only. and then colored only. And the fountain that you drink water out of, it said colored only.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to a restaurant, no colored. Everything was colored.
Mm-hmm.
And when Billy Wolf, I went to school, and I'm from St. Louis, and I
Yeah.
went to high school,
Mm-hmm.
and it was Rosetta Kane, and it was an all-girls high school, and there were several black, well, I want to say black because that's what I say, but
Yeah.
Back then there were several colored girls in Rosetta Kane High School, and it, I never thought anything about it. As a matter of fact, she was one of my good friends, and I just told Billy, no, I don't care, if I have to wrestle a black girl, that's fine, that's no
Mm-hmm.
problem with me. And he said, well, they have never wrestled a white girl in Texas, so
Mm-hmm.
we're sending you to Texas with a black girl wrestler. And I said, oh, that's fine,
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the way that was, and I never thought a thing about it.
Yeah, I know, for sure.
They're very good athletes, I must say that. Very, very good. The one that I wrestled was Ethel Johnson.
Absolutely, for sure.
She was awesome.
We're speaking to Penny Banner, the first ever AWA Women's World Champion, here tonight on New Era of Wrestling Radio. Of course, her book is entitled Banner Days, which is a look at the history of women's professional wrestling in her entire career, as we get more into those topics right now. www.bannerdays.com for more information, and that's how you can order the book and look for information on Penny Banner's career. I'm looking forward and reflecting on the career. The interesting part about it, I thought, was when Jim Crockett said he wanted you to wrestle clean, and you've been wrestling heelish your whole entire wrestling career, and then he wants you to change your whole entire style within the NWA.
I know. Well, that was because I got married to a wrestler.
Yeah.
And the wrestler wrestled clean.
Mm-hmm.
And his name is Johnny, and he was a clean wrestler because we had moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, and I still kept my style of wrestling. I wrestled dirty. I started out clean, but I'll tell you, Chris, after those times of just getting so beat up by June Byers, I just decided I was going to fight back the only way I knew how, and that was to go to the ropes and get under the ropes and pull the hair, and so I really liked it because I found out it was an easier way of wrestling. I could jump out of the ring when I got tired,
Mm-hmm.
and I could, like I said, pull hair and gouge eyes if I wanted to gouge eyes, and just kind of have a payback for the lack of my experience. But I did get good at what I was doing, and I was enjoying it. And then, Crockett says, well, you're married to this babyface Weaver, Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we want you to change your style, if you will. And I said, no, I'm not going to change my style. And he tried, like 15 minutes, and I said, no, I don't want to. So it ended up I was going to wrestle this girl that I had never seen before, but she was from the 40s, and her name was Annie Laverne.
Uh-huh.
Well, I had no idea what Annie Laverne looked like. I never even heard the name before. When I saw Annie Laverne, she was like 5'6", maybe 6 or 5'5", by 5'6". She was a big mama. And I tried, I would try to pull her off by her hair. She didn't go anywhere. And I tried kicking her, and the kicking didn't hurt her. And it bothered her. And the crowd, every time I would do it, they yay, and they clap, and they just yayed me. And I thought, wow, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle this girl? And the more dirtier I tried to get with her, the more the people liked me.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, So anyway, I did end up beating her because I found out she had been kind of idle for a while, and I was in such fantastic shape. I ran her around the ring, and I tired her down. And when you can't breathe, you blow up. And when you blow up, if you don't get beat pinning your shoulders, you're gonna wish you did, because you just can't breathe, and you want to get out of there and get the air in your chest and open your lungs up again. But anyway, after the matches were over, I was standing out there, and I did watch. I didn't usually have a chance to watch the men wrestle, but I was standing out there. Everybody came up and was asking me for my autograph, and they would say, "Oh, you're so good," and "What do you do, and how did you do that?" And I got to liking that. So I did change my style, and God knows I don't. I had to change everything. Everything I used to be able to get out of easy, which was the easy way. like I said, pulling the hair, putting my head under the ropes. I no longer was able to do that, and I had to be more scientific in my wrestling. And that ended up to be a good thing because I think it ended up making me a better wrestler than I thought I was. I mean, not that I thought I was that good, but I mean, I know I was a better wrestler after I got through learning all the scientific ways of getting out of it. I just never thought of going back to the way I was when I first began because I always associated with really getting the dookie knocked out of me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, for sure. We're speaking to Penny Banner, the first ever AWA Women's World Champion here tonight on New York Wrestling Radio. Okay, we got about 10 minutes left with her, so I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you can keep them summarized briefly, of course. The book is entitled Banner Days, A History of the Women's Wrestling from the 50s, 60s, and her whole career, looking at all the legends and everything like that. Okay, getting back to everything that's very interesting, the fabulous Moolah, who I did actually interview during her book publicity tour, I found to be very kayfabe and very into herself. Within your book, I realized kind of what a self-serving person she really can be, and that she's really, kind of full of herself in a sense, I think, anyways.
Well, everybody said that. People that I know that read her book said the same thing. It was all I this and I that, and I did this and I did that. I don't know. I'd never read it.
You wrestled her many times before.
No, 8 times.
What?
Only 8 times.
Well, that's many times if you ask me. Today, maybe you might see 2 guys wrestle twice in a year or twice every 2 years. So I'm going to say, just from your example, is she more overrated than many people? Is she overrated the way the media has put her over the years and the WWE has? As far as her in-ring capacity?
Well, I don't know how much time I have to say this, but I could probably write a whole chapter on her. First of all, I wrestled for 10 years before I ever heard the name Moolah. She was an outlaw. She wrestled only in the South Carolina area, and she was not part of the NWA association, and the promoters never booked her around the country. She never traveled the country like I did.
Yeah.
She was strictly local, and she was down in the South Carolina area, and she went first as slave girl, and then somehow she got to be Fabulous Moolah. And then in '64, I found out, she was down there with Buddy Lee. And, well, she had a school, and all I can say about her is she, after June Byers, and a true champion that June Byers was. I got beat in the middle of the ring for 3 years every time I wrestled June Byers. And with
Moolah.
Moolah. All there was arguing with the referee. It's sticking her head out the ropes, arguing with the fans. If she wasn't doing that, she was jumping out of the ring, arguing with the fans that were out there. I just didn't think that she has the capability of holding a championship title, and how she got it was, she took her group of girls up to Baltimore and had a tournament with her group of girls. And, she only taught her group of girls what she wanted them to know. Mm-hmm. And if she beat them the way she beat everybody else, it's the illegal way. So, yes, I think she's definitely overrated, and I know that when Vince McMahon Jr. got a hold of wrestling, the way he has gotten hold of wrestling in the 80s, he's the one that put her over the top. And, she's got it made now, God. All she has to do is go out there and read his scripts and be another comic character, and, that's about what she should have been all along.
Yeah. Just in a small yes or no comparison, is Mae Young a better wrestler than she ever was, of course?
I have no idea. I wrestled Mae when I very first started. My first tag team was against Mae Young, and I don't remember diddly squat about it. Everybody says Mae Young was very good, so I'm going to have to go with that. She must have been very good, but I never wrestled her.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left here with Penny Banner. Banner Days is the name of the book, A History of the Professional Wrestling of Women's Wrestling. So many stories, including this, looking at what women's wrestling and how it came to be, and what women's wrestling was like back then. Okay, 3 more questions in these last 5 minutes, Penny, so you can kind of summarize and briefly put this. But, okay, the highlight of your entertainment career as far as personal relationships go is having 5 dates with Elvis Presley, I guess you could say, and you go very into the stories about Elvis's feelings and behaviors, and it's a very interesting look on Elvis Presley's life from the few people that were inside it, and like when you go to the mansion and all these great things. So, and have you talked to Beebo Beavis in the past? Maybe.
No, I never saw Beebo Beavis again.
Really?
Even got to thank him. I really didn't believe him. And I never have gotten to thank him, and I just feel so bad. But I've mentioned his name whenever I can because he was so nice, and he was so good to me. And yes, Elvis and I had a wonderful time together, but I'm not going to tell you any more about it. You're going to have to read my book.
Absolutely, for sure. But the funny thing was, though, is that Elvis loved professional wrestling, and you were the one that he liked.
Yeah, he really. I mean, we weren't lovers. We just had it. We were just neckers. Kissers. Back in my day, you know, that's what you did. You kissed and you necked. You necked all night long, and that's what we did. We had a great time.
Okay, absolutely, for sure. Okay, as far as Stu Hart and the Canadian World Tag Team Championships from women, you were founded that, and you had 3 different partners, and they all went off to get married, and then you left in the end and gave it to your friend. Overall, and just the opinion of it, how frustrating do you think it was for you as a person that every time you had the Canadian Tag Team Championship and you would defend it, every time you went up there, you had a new partner as your other half for the tag team titles? Well,
Bonnie and I, the first one, she and I went up there a couple times, but the second time we went up there is when we got the title, not the first time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was just real happy for Bonnie. I really was. And she and Stu are still married, and they're living right there in Tampa, Florida. They love Tampa. And that was a little bit frustrating. But then Betty Jo came along, and Betty Jo and I were even better because I was better. Bonnie was the great one in she and I's partnership, and Betty Jo and I were closer than Bonnie and I. And then Lorraine Johnson came along, and man, we were awesome by then. I mean, 6 years. Now, you imagine wrestling 6 nights a week for 6 years, 2 out of 3 fall matches.
Yeah. And all
2 out of 3 fall matches. I had a whole lot of experience under my belt by the time I got with Lorraine Johnson, and it was frustrating, but, you know, that's the way it is, and you just move on and you do what you have to do, and that's what I did. And I just want to tell you, I'm so glad and so thankful that you gave me a call again and we were able to have this conversation. And can I say hello to somebody in Miami?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
His name is Donald. I met him here in Charlotte years ago, and he moved to Miami, Florida, and he just loves it. And I haven't been there in quite a while. But anyway, I'd like to say hello to everybody in Miami and all over the United States and all the territories that I've wrestled in.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank them all for being my fans. And thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely, for sure, Penny. Before we let you go again, the book is entitled Banner Days. And in these last 2 minutes or so, you can give a brief summary of the book one more time and why the wrestling historians or the wrestling fans would enjoy this book rather than just a book written by today's star, which is just a bunch of highlights of his career, which this is really a journal of your entire life.
Thank you very much. One of the other historians, Mr. Jim Melby from Minneapolis, is coming out with a book on history of men wrestling. I just, like I said, wanted my book to go down as history for the lady wrestlers, and with the difference in the way it is today and the way it was and how they got to do what they're doing today. And the reason they're getting to do it is because of what we went through in our pioneer days, you know, the history of it and the traveling and what we had to do to get the towns opened up, like Indianapolis and St. Louis, Missouri, and Minneapolis. You know, you couldn't wrestle in those cities. We were barred, and we got it open, and now, like I said, someone else, the commissioners in all those cities, I bet they're rolling over in their graves at what's going on today.
Absolutely, for sure. Okay, Penny, thank you so much for your wonderful conversation this evening. www.bannerdays.com. The book is entitled Banner Days, and that's the website, bannerdays.com, for more information on and how you can order Penny Banner's book. Penny, thank you so much as always, and we appreciate your conversation tonight. And your book was very touching and a very good look, and probably the best look at women's professional wrestling that's going to be written by someone who wrestled in those days.
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate it.
Have a wonderful night.
You too. Bye-bye.